All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the Everything College World podcast. Today, me and Nick here, we're doing our preview and prediction for a mega clash in the SEC between Georgia and Texas. Long-awaited game in Austin, going down 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time on ABC. 3.5-point favorites are the Horns. 56.5 is the total. We start with the Georgia offense. Carson Beck, he's been on a real heater the last couple of weeks. And, the first half against Alabama was one of the worst halves I've seen from a top quarterback prospect, Nick, where he was just incredibly rattled, incredibly inaccurate. And at the end of the game, he was phenomenal in the second half, of course. At the end of the game, though, he still ended with 3 interceptions, 54% comp rate, 439 yards. But he led them back, and they were leading at one point in that game late. And if they would have won, they would have all been forgotten, right? But that was their last road trip. 2 road games this year. He's not been very good. Going on the road to Texas is not going to be any easier. I expect, Beck to be, much more calm, much more relaxed. I don't think he'll make the same mistakes. He's played much better the last 2 weeks, being at home, of course, against inferior opponents, completing 75+% over the last 2 games, had 459 and 3 touchdowns against Mississippi State. Also had 2 picks in that game. What do you think, the expectation is here for Carson Beck, Nick? Because against Alabama, it was brutal, and that's a big reason why they were down so big in that game. Before that, against Kentucky, they weren't all that great. I anticipate Beck's going to come on the road here against a bit of a shaky secondary, and he's going to put on a bit of a clinic. Will it be enough to get the job done? We'll find out a little bit later, but I think he's going to have a very good game here.
Certainly a lot of Georgia's struggles against Alabama on the road in Tuscaloosa was the fact that Beck really did not look comfortable in that first half, making mistake after mistake that is uncharacteristic for a quarterback that many people thought could be the number 1 quarterback off the draft board this coming April. He's right up there in that conversation with the guy standing on the other side of the sideline, Quinn Ewers, and also Jalen Miller, the guy that was on the other side of the sideline in Tuscaloosa. Had a bad day in that game, right? Obviously, towards the end in the second half when they were behind, he had to sling it a lot. So he threw for 50 attempts against Alabama, which is the most this season. He also threw for 48 attempts against Mississippi State this past weekend. Had a 54% comp rate against Alabama, 3 touchdowns, 3 picks. Also took 3 sacks in that game, which was the most pressures that he's felt all season. I think a key to success, if you are a Texas fan, is making sure that there is a ton of pressure on Beck, making him uncomfortable, making him a little bouncy feet. When you look at the rest of the games this season, Kentucky had 0 sacks on him, although they did get some pressures at points. Auburn had 2 sacks, Clemson had a sack, but the rest of the games, Kentucky, Tennessee, Tech, and Mississippi State had 0 sacks, gave him a lot of time in the pocket to work and get things done. 459 yards passing against Mississippi State and 75% comp rate in that game. But he did have 2 picks. Again, the turnover bug has seemed to be a bit of an issue for Beck this year, where he seems to be throwing into tough situations. And yes, the secondary for Texas has shown some weaknesses at times, but they still have some strong pieces that could potentially go out there and make a big play and make him uncomfortable. I think that's certainly a big key to circle. Overall, though, still having a really great season for what you expected. 1,800 yards passing, 15 touchdowns, 67% comp rate. Good enough stats, right, for a star quarterback at a star program. Makes a lot of sense in terms of what you're seeing so far. Going in a tough environment. It's very loud in DKR. I've caught a game there before, a high-value matchup. It was very loud, tough to hear. Certainly expect those Texas fans, being the number 1 team in the nation, to show up and be loud and proud in that game. Could Beck be rattled? I certainly think so. It's all about how he starts. If he comes out early, looks confident, makes no mistakes, doesn't really bounce around in the pocket, I think they'll be just fine. But he comes out, shaky like he did against Alabama, it could be a very long day for the Georgia Bulldogs.
And Beck is typically a highly accurate quarterback to all levels of the field. That's one of the biggest traits he has, is his ability to be accurate all across the field, especially in the intermediate range. He has great zip and velocity on the ball. You look at the wide receiver group with him, dishing it out a lot more this year in terms of passing attempts. It's allowed some of these guys really showcase their talents, and they have a lot of versatility here. Is Colby Young going to play? We're not sure yet. He's their 4th leading pass catcher. Above them, though, you got Dylan Bell, a bit of a Swiss Army knife, leading the team with 4 touchdowns, 298 yards. Dominic Lovett's a great slot weapon. And then Arian Smith, he's finally healthy for once. This guy has tremendous speed. He, always gets loose in these big-time matchups. 4-12 and 3 scores this year. Of course, against Alabama, he had a big touchdown as well. 132 yards in that game, 134 this past week. Arian Smith is the real deal. I certainly think they're going to be taking a lot of shots deep. Lawson Lucky's been a pleasant surprise at tight end. Landon Humphreys, he's still in the room if he needs to get involved. Only a couple of touches this year, but he's been a difference maker. Anthony Evans as well, if he's healthy enough. I mean, they have a good deep group here, Nick. Maybe no star elite talent, but in terms of versatility, I think this is one of the best groups Georgia's had under Kirby.
A very strong wide receiver room with a lot of different weapons. I think Arian Smith's a super fun player to watch. 17.9 yards per grab and 3 scores. You saw him get some big touchdowns as of late. Dominic Lovett is still a very sustainable and consistent player, while Dylan Bell is really solid in the red zone with 4 grabs this year, while Lawson Lucky has been a very impressive player so far this year with 3 touchdowns on only 10 grabs, while Landon Humphreys and Colby Young are still around and being involved, although they haven't been as productive as you might hope from those two. This is a solid room, right? Really good players. There's a reason why this team is able to throw for 318 yards per game and 2.5 passing touchdowns per game, is because they just have a really strong supporting cast around Beck. Expect all these players to have a strong day. I said a little bit earlier that Texas secondary has some weaknesses and a little bit of a weak spot, so you're going to try and get the matchups you want, try and get Smith matched up where you want him, and see if you can make him expose that secondary and pick up some big gains.
Now you look at a Georgia rushing attack that they just don't seem to have that physical dominance we're accustomed to seeing. Only 134 yards per game, a tad under 5 yards per carry, and some of those numbers they kind of ran up against weaker opponents. And I guess they had a good game against Clemson as well, but none of that really matters. The Tigers were a completely different team than they were on opening day. And since they've entered conference play, it's just not been a good rushing attack, coming off their best performance, I'd say, against Mississippi State. That was still only 146 yards on 29 attempts. Trevor Etienne, phenomenal runner for them, 335 and 4 scores. Nate Frazier's been a steady number 2. And when you talk about this offensive line, this is a big reason why. Coming into the yard, kind of felt they had some issues at tackle, and then Tate Ratledge goes down. Jared Wilson at center, he's been gone the last couple of games. Should be back for this one, I would hope, and he's been great in pass protection as well. Drew Bobo's been a respectable replacement. But the offensive line's been a big reason why, Nick. They just don't have that physical dominance where these guys are all tremendous pass blockers, but in terms of run game physicality, it's just not the same as we've seen in years past, and I think that's what's led Georgia to being incredibly one-dimensional, and that's why they're not as strong on offense as you would accustomed to seeing. 33.5 points per game is still a good mark, but Georgia's been unstoppable against man coverage over the past couple of years because of what they possess on the ground. This year, you're just not seeing it, though.
Certainly not your typical Georgia-looking offense. 134 yards per game on the ground is not a good enough number for this Georgia Bulldogs offense. 4.6 yards per carry and 1.7 touchdowns per game is not what you want to see. Etienne's been good, right? 335 and 4 scores. Nate Frazier's not been bad. Branson Robinson, when healthy, has 3 touchdowns as well. But I think you're right. The offensive line is not playing to the level that it has been in previous years. I know they've been banged up. They've been trying to plug different pieces in and make it work. They've been good in pass block. As I said, Beck did not get sacked in several games so far this season. They really only struggled in pass block against Alabama, who had a really strong pass rush that had a successful day there. I think they're lucky they haven't played a team like South Carolina that has a really strong and dominant pass rush. I think that pass rush would absolutely eat up this offensive line for Georgia. I think when you look at this, Texas could potentially have a strong advantage in the trenches in this game. They've been really good pass rushing unit so far this year. Been really solid getting after the quarterback. If you make Beck uncomfortable, I think you're going to have a really strong day. And given the weakness on this offensive line, I think it's certainly possible Texas will be able to do that.
And I'll still focus on this O-line. Ernest Green at left tackle, over on the right side, Xavier Truss. And these guys were having all right seasons, but I didn't feel like this was the greatest of duos entering the fall. Dylan Fairchild at left guard's been phenomenal. Then Micah Morris filling in at right guard. He's been very solid as well. So I think this is an offensive line. They have tremendous talent. They're great in pass protection, but I expect them to be pretty one-dimensional in this game against a very stiff Texas run defense. Now we move to the Longhorn offense, a unit that didn't see Quinn Ewers for a couple of weeks, came back out in Red River, was a little shaky early on, settled in, ended up having a great game, 199 yards, a touchdown, had that pick on the first drive, completed 69%. This is a quarterback we've seen, you talk about nerves in big games. This guy's incredibly calm. He proved that last year when he went on the road early on in the season and beat Alabama. I don't think that's a worry one bit. Obviously we talked about chemistry maybe being a bit of an issue going into Red River, Nick. Just not playing for a couple of games. This is still a relatively new wide receiver group, and they've only played a couple of games together. But I think now you're starting to see him get in full sync with his group of guys. Isaiah Bond, you're hopeful he's going to play in this contest. He's their leading pass catcher. He exited against Oklahoma. Gunnar Helm's been a very good tight end. They're incredibly deep, though, across the board. True freshman Ryan Wingo is very explosive. He's also one of those high-end recruits that hasn't been as productive as guys like Williams or Smith, but 296 yards and 2 scores. He'll get there eventually. Matthew Golden's a nice speedster as well. DeAndre Moore, younger cat. Jonte Cook. They're incredibly deep here, Nick, and that doesn't even include Sialis Bolden, who's 8th in receiving, who brings a lot of versatility and a lot of speed as well. What are your thoughts on Ewers coming into this game? And then, of course, just a phenomenal deep bunch of wide receivers.
This is a very interesting wide receiver room and a very talented offense that Quinn Ewers is leading. They plugged in Arch Manning when Ewers went down and had no issues. They plugged Ewers back in for the Texas game, and he was really solid. You rattled off his stats. He's been having a really good season, really good and comfortable in the pocket, 72% comp rate, 890, 9 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions. Plugged him in, seemed to work perfectly. Yes, there was some, early on struggles with that interception early in the game, which I think is something that you have to keep an eye on, but outside of that one interception, he was really solid, had a really good game, and looked comfortable in the pocket. This is a team that's completing passes at a high clip, 70% completion between the two quarterbacks, 300 yards per game through the air, and it really does rely on a really deep wide receiver room. We talked about how Georgia had a deep room. I think this Texas room is just as deep, if not deeper. Isaiah Bond came over from Alabama, and he's been a really good target for this team. 369, 17.6, and 3 scores. While Gunnar Helm, Ryan Wingo, and Matthew Golden have all been really solid with 2 touchdowns at least for each of them. DeAndre Moore, Jonte Cook, Jaden Blue all have 2 receiving touchdowns at least as well. So they're spreading the wealth out. They have a bunch of different players involved. Still has Bolden further down the depth charts getting involved as well. So they're running really deep down there in Austin, which I think is really helpful when you can have different types of players that diversify your offense and spread the wealth. It's a deep wide receiver room with a lot of different talented pieces. I think they'll have no issue, attacking them. We saw Alabama have success passing the ball early in the game against Georgia. It certainly got tougher as the game went on, as Georgia got more comfortable in that game and started to put together a comeback. So it certainly got a little more difficult for Alabama, and I think you could certainly make the case they may be able to hold Texas as the game kind of develops and goes on. But I like the matchup early on. I like the weapons they have, and I think when you have Ewers in there, who's a really comfortable, confident signal caller, things will go positive for your team.
And everything we just talked about, you match that with a steel curtain up front. Coming into the year, I thought Texas had the second best O-line in the country. Then after the Michigan game, I went ahead and moved them up. They're number 1, and I think they're still there. It starts with potential number 1 overall pick, Kelvin Banks, the left tackle. He's just phenomenal, especially in pass protection. Hayden Connor hasn't allowed much pressure. You have a veteran center, Jake Majors, who really just connects the dots for everybody. Talk about Arch getting plugged into there. I mean, Majors was big in making sure there's a smooth transition. DJ Campbell, and then at right guard, and then a new starter at right tackle, and Cameron Williams. These guys have all been good. They allow no pressure at all, Nick. They played Michigan. That's probably one of the best D-lines in all of FBS, one of the top 3 at least. They bring a lot of heat on the interior and off the edge, and they couldn't do anything when they played Texas. This is a legit offensive line. Georgia, they've been a little bit weaker up front compared to in the past. No real elite standout talent, but it's still going to be a physical affair. But Texas figures they have an edge.
This is a really strong offensive line from Texas. Kelvin Banks has been incredible at left tackle. He's a guy that certainly you want to continue to keep an eye on. Jake Majors has been really good at center. DJ Campbell and Cameron Williams have been solid on the right side as well. Hayden Connor has been good at left guard. This is a really solid 5 players they have here. I like this deep offensive line, a big physical unit that's been able to protect their quarterback and make sure that Ewers is able to stay upright while also creating running back lanes for this by committee approach that they're running with. They're having success on the ground, 189 yards per game, and a lot of that does rely on the offensive line. That's creating solid blocking pass and creating nice holes for this offense to run through.
Yeah, I mean, they were very complimentary against Michigan, able to stay ahead of the sticks with their run game, 143 yards in that one. Against OU, it was a little tough sledding early, but they ended up ripping off some big plays, ended up with almost 6 yards per carry, 177 and 3 scores, and you allude to a by-committee approach. Contravion Winsner leading the way with 278. Jaden Blue at 269. He's probably the best running back they have currently, because Baxter's injured. And then Jarrett Gibson, freshman, is the 3rd leading rusher. All these guys have 200-plus yards. Fresh legs, Nick, and I think that's going to be the theme all year long is Texas. This is not going to be an issue of concern. And when Baxter went down in the preseason, we even said Texas will be just fine at running back, and they're delivering big time.
I think they will be just fine at running back, right? This has been a really balanced running back room that has a bunch of different players that can get the job done. Trey Wisner's been really good. 6.2 yards per carry and 2 scores for him on the season. Jaden Blue, 269 yards rushing and 4 scores. Jarrett Gibson, 3 touchdowns as well. So I think you lose some of the ability to run the ball that Arch Manning had when he was at quarterback. Ewers is not really known as a runner compared to Manning, but I think when you have Weiser, Blue, and Gibson, this is a really solid trio there that can rotate, move pieces in and out. I like what I've seen so far of this Texas rushing attack.
Now you move to the Georgia defense, a unit that just doesn't seem to be up to par like we've seen in the past. Last year we alluded to how their run defense was a little bit shaky at times, never really put them in positions to lose games. This year it's a little different, though. Against Kentucky, the Wildcats ran it straight at them. They had a good amount of success doing so. Alabama, obviously Milroe had a lot of success with his legs, and they anchored down in the second half a good bit. Auburn had a couple of nice runs. Mississippi State didn't really factor in too much, but this run defense just is not as polished as we're used to seeing. They're still great up front, though. Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins is the leading tackle for loss guy. Nazir Stackhouse on the interior. He's a phenomenal player. Christian Miller, Damon Wilson. I mean, they have a couple of different guys. This is a nice rotation. Warren Brinson as well. Whenever he's healthy, certainly a big impact performer on the interior. This Georgia defense, though, they just don't seem to have that elite difference maker. I know Michael Williams is supposed to be that, but he certainly has battled health for most of this year. He's getting, over the last couple weeks has played, though, and he should be 100% in this game. He's not typically very productive when he is on the field, though. He just hasn't really taken that next step, even though in the Clemson game in the opener, he was phenomenal. So you never really know what you're going to get from Michael. He figures to be that difference maker off the edge, though, but in terms of on the interior, they just don't have one. And Michigan had those, and those guys did nothing. So it figures here that they're not going to be able to control the line of scrimmage as they would, when they won national championships, Nick. So are you worried about Georgia's run defense here? Because they're never just going to get smashed in the mouth and give up 250 yards by any means. But if Texas can establish balance, it's going to be hard to get stops.
Georgia's giving up 120 yards per game so far this year, which you may look on the surface and say, hey, that's not that bad. But we're used to Kirby Smart's defenses giving up, 80, 70, 60 yards per game, way below that number at 120. And it certainly is concerning. Tyrone Ingram-Dawkins has been really good, right? 12 total tackles, 8 tackles for loss, 3 sacks. Been really happy with what he's been able to do. Kristen Miller, 11 total tackles, 3 tackles for loss, and a sack. Damon Wilson, 10 total tackles. Nazir Stackhouse, 9. Michael Williams has 3 total tackles, including 3 tackles for loss in the pass breakup. But outside of that, the numbers have not been great coming from this defensive line. This is not a unit that's really producing like they previously used to. I've been concerned with their ability to get after the run and stuff the run. We saw Alabama have success early on running the ball, in particular Jalen Milroe have success running the ball against Georgia. They got better throughout the game. They looked strong in the second half. If they want to win this game in Texas, the run defense has to play like they did in that second half against Alabama. Got to be in the backfield quickly, got to blow up plays, got to limit those opportunities, because if Texas can really be moving effectively early on, getting to 2nd and 5, 2nd and 4 type of territory, I think they'll be able to really control and set the tempo that they want to play at.
You look at the middle of the defense, one of the best linebacking groups in all of college football. Smael Mondon, you're hoping he'll be healthy for this one. He's missed the last couple of games. He's been great when he's on the field, in all facets, coverage, run defense, tackling. C.J. Allen has been a great run defender as well. A little bit, shaky in coverage, though. Braylon Wilson, a younger cat's been getting on the field in relief of Mondon. And then you have Jalen Walker, who you talk about difference makers. This is a legit first-round talent, highly athletic, very versatile. When they played Jalen Milroe, this is the guy you counted on to kind of be the spy. You're not going to have to spy Quinn Ewers. I mean, he's certainly mobile, but he's not going to really, they're not going to be calling too many design quarterback runs, which means you can unleash him off the edge, Nick. And when you got Kelvin Banks on the left side, who's going to be an early draft pick next year, you want to find an equalizer. And this guy might give him a bit of a workout and might be able to free things up. So I think Walker's going to play a key role in this game and trying to find some pass rush.
I think Walker certainly is a guy you want to circle and keep an eye on. He's been solid so far this season, 22 total tackles, 2.5 tackles for loss, 1.5 sacks. C.J. Allen's been a really good quarterback for this defense, 27 total tackles. Or Braylon Wilson, a younger player who's been playing well, 21 total tackles, 2.5 tackles for loss, 1.5 sacks. While Smael Mondon, one healthy 17 total tackles, 2 pass breakups. Another key piece of the defense has not really been fully healthy. If he's good to go in this game, that could be a big difference maker.
And you look at the secondary, we've talked about, every time we talk about Georgia in big games, we talk about how their secondary might be prone to give up big plays. And I think certainly against this receiving group, that could certainly be on the table as well. Dan Jackson at safety, he's been very good this year. I don't really consider him to be all that athletic. He's been a phenomenal tackler. He's been quite sound in coverage as well. Of course, you have Malachi Starks, who's probably the best at his position in CFB. He has great range and coverage. It lays the boom against the run. Also an efficient tackler. So I love what they have right now at safety. Janelle Aguero in the slot. Starks plays that position a lot as well. Aguero really hasn't been that much of a difference maker for them when he's been on the field. Kind of maybe a weaker link in this secondary. And then they've given the reins to this secondary of Dalen Everett and Julian Humphrey. 2 corners that are playing less than stellar, I would say, so far. They're going to have tough responsibilities. This is a team that doesn't seem to generate a lot of sacks. That was kind of a problem last year as well, Nick, where the pass rush isn't all that great with what they bring off the edge. But one thing that they do often, and they only seem to bring it out in big games, is they'll send nickel blitzes when you least expect it. And that leads to a lot of production. Can the secondary afford to take risks like that?
I think it's certainly a gamble, and I think they can afford to take risk if they find themselves in a strong position. I think the nickel blitz is a nice wild card that this Georgia defense under Glenn Schulman and Kirby Smart has really been solid to use. Malachi Starks leading the team in tackles, 32 total tackles plus a pick for him. Dan Jackson, 31 total tackles, interception for him, and 2 pass breakups. KJ Bolden, a true freshman who's been playing a lot of solid minutes, 21 total tackles plus a sack and a pick for him. Dylan Everett, 22 total tackles and a pass breakup. Aguero, 14 total tackles, while Humphrey has 2 pass breakups and 7 total tackles. Good numbers from several of these talented players. We've seen some issues in the past from this Georgia secondary. They had some trouble against Alabama. Again, we're going to keep highlighting that game, saying it's the best case study so far this season for Georgia. Giving up 192 yards per game through the air is not an atrocious number at all, but you saw them this past weekend struggle against a quarterback at Mississippi State in Michael Van Buren, who is a younger player who hasn't played a whole lot. He had 306 yards passing and 3 touchdowns through the air, so they had some success. Mississippi State, a team that's had no pulse on offense, throwing the ball. Certainly a bit of an alarm bell if you're a Georgia fan, because a bad offense in Mississippi State was able to really do some solid things to you. They had a couple deep balls in that game from Van Buren, and when you look at Texas, Quinn Ewers is significantly better than what Mississippi State has at quarterback. Certainly could be a red flag to look at.
Yeah, Mississippi State, had numerous 70-yard scoring drives. They were not in garbage time either. They were still well within a reasonable score of this game. They were driving up and down the field with ease. Move to the Texas defense. This is something I said like 3 years ago, and it's still true to this day, is that this is a good run defense, and they're very good on the D-line. And boy, does the rest of college football know about that now. Colin Simmons, 7.5 TFLs, a true freshman, 5-star, has been phenomenal for them off the edge. Look at some of the other guys, though, that contribute to this wrecking crew. Vernon Broughton, Alfred Collins, Barron Sorrell. Trey Moore hasn't exactly kicked in the high gear as a pass rusher yet, but he's been highly productive in his career. Jermaine Royal, underrated transfer addition. Ethan Burke, I think, is a very good football player, even though he's been a bit of a struggle. It's been a bit of a struggle fest for him when it comes to tackling. This is an incredibly deep defensive line, Nick, against the run. It's not going to be easy to find anything against Texas, and we just talked about, earlier, the limitations of the Georgia offensive line due to injuries, and they just don't have the same physical dominance. It seems like an area that Texas is going to win, maybe 100, 120 rushing yards max they're going to allow in this game. Georgia's going to struggle to find balance, and it's because these guys are big and nasty up front with a lot of size.
This is a very strong and physical defensive line that's been having a really solid season so far this year. I've been happy with what I've seen out of them, and this is a good physical unit that can produce tackles for loss, can produce sacks. They have a bunch of different pieces that are getting involved. Colin Simmons has been really great as true freshman, 23 total tackles, 7.5 tackles for loss, 4 sacks. Byron Sorrell, 12 total tackles, 4.5 tackles for loss, 2.5 sacks. Ethan Burke, 8 total tackles, 3 tackles for loss, a pick, a sack, and a pick that he returned for a touchdown, a pick 6. Trey Moore, 11 total tackles, the transfer who has been really solid for this team. He was a really good add out of the portal, a guy who played well at UCLA, a really solid add for them. I like what they've seen out of him so far, a really good piece for this defensive line. He's been good. Alfred Collins, 14 total tackles, 1 pass breakup for him. Bill Norton, 4 total tackles as well. A really solid physical unit. I think that they get in the quarterback and really put a lot of pressure on Beck. They can find some success early on.
Now you look at the middle of this defense. We just talked about this group last week. Anthony Hill, of course, is a phenomenal player, great athlete. The rest of the group probably not as up to par, even though they've played a lot better this year than in seasons past. David Gabenda, Lona Lefau, Mo Blackwell, whenever he gets on the field, he's been not that great compared to the other players. But this is a linebacking group that's certainly improved, and it doesn't appear to be a weak length here. Georgia, I know, wants to try and create matchups against some of these other guys not named Anthony Hill. But so far, they've passed the test, Nick, especially Gabenda, I think, is a highly improved run defender as a veteran for this football team. Linebacking group certainly can be a tad iffy, and I'd say they're middle of the pack, but Anthony Hill is the leading tackler here, and he is a massive difference maker in the middle. So if Georgia's looking to spring any success against the run or, execute screens, they got to be aware of where Hill lines up, because this guy has a lot of closing speed, and he can wreck your day instantly.
So linebacking core that's getting better as the season goes on. I think Hill's been a really solid piece for this defense. 42 total tackles, 8.5 tackles for loss, 4.5 sacks plus a pick. Gabenda, 32 total tackles, 4.5 tackles for loss. That's your top 2 tacklers right there. Ali Lafau as well has been solid. 18 total tackles, 5 tackles for loss, 2 sacks. Maurice Blackwell, 16 total tackles and rotational snaps for him. Solid unit. I like what this unit's been able to do. I think this is a good enough linebacking unit. I'm a little more high on them than you are. I think they are not getting enough credit right now. I think they are strong in the middle, certainly with Hill leading the way. I think they deserve a little more credit. I think they're going to have a solid game here.
And you look at this secondary group, it's also been pretty improved. But Texas has not played a single good quarterback all year, Nick. They just haven't. If you look at the schedule, they're not playing anybody good. Andrew McCumba at safety, those have been a pleasant addition. Not as good in tackling or against the run. Michael Toffee, a veteran, has been pretty sound in all regards. You look at the slot, Jalen Gelbu has been, veteran as well. It's also stepped up his play a good bit. Jedi Barron, is kind of a, a mixed, he's kind of a chess piece in the secondary, quite frankly, but he's playing full-time outside corner this year, and he's handling it with, ease. He's having a great year out wide. To Malik Muhammad, he was one of their breakout players last year. 4 pass breakups already this season. He's continuing to do so now. And then Gavin Holmes as well. He'll be the third corner that gets on the field, a guy that they're certainly going to look to target. This is a concern for me, Nick, because when you've not played a good quarterback all year, sometimes it can be a shock when this kind of quarterback and this kind of speed comes out, and you're like, oh, hold on, and you start to get a little overwhelmed because you were not expecting this one bit. Is that something that might be happening for Texas here? Because, again, when you look at the schedule, they have not played even an above-average quarterback. So I certainly think this Texas secondary might be in for a bit of a shock, that is. Do you think that they can handle the storm and calm themselves down and get back into this game?
I'm going to slightly counter you because when you look at a similar opponent, same opponent, they played Mississippi State the week before, and Van Buren was 12 of 23 for 144 yards, so he did not have a good game compared to the 300 yards he put up against Georgia. Not a perfect comparison, but I think it's something to keep an eye on. You and I have talked about this, right? They have not played a star quarterback yet. They've really not played anyone close to the caliber of talent that Beck is. Michigan doesn't have a quarterback. A lot of these teams are really weak teams. So that certainly is something to keep an eye on. I do think the secondary will fare well. I think this is a secondary that will figure out, this is not week 1, so I'm not as concerned about it. They do have reps against some bad teams. I still think it will be good enough. I think what they have is talented. Guillebeau has been really good, 29 total tackles, a pass breakup tackle for loss. Tiafi has been good, 24 total tackles, 2.5 tackles for loss, a sack, and 2 pass breakups. Barron has been really solid, 22 total tackles, a pick, 4 pass breakups, been really good in coverage. Makumba's looked good transferring over, 20 total tackles, a pick, and 3 pass breakups. Malik Muhammad, 4 pass breakups, 12 total tackles. Gavin Holmes, a pass breakup, and 6 total tackles. I'm confident in the secondary. I think the secondary will get the job done. They have not faced against a strong quarterback. Yes, that's certainly true, but I think they have experience in the past, and this is a unit that has some veteran pieces from different programs that have transferred in and from Texas itself. I trust what the secondary will be able to do.
Yeah, and I certainly like some of the pieces they have. The aforementioned Muhammad, Barron, and the Mukumba. He's been around the country a little bit, and this is a guy who has played a lot of football at this point, doing a great job for them at safety. Last time they faced a good quarterback, though, Nick, was Michael Penix in the Sugar Bowl, and he put on an absolute clinic. And Beck, I'd say, is a very comparable player in terms of talent, so it'll be interesting to see how that works out. Looking at the team comparisons, at quarterback, you got to call it even, right? Both these guys are going to be competing for the number 1 quarterback selection in the draft. A lot of offensive edges here, though, Nick, and I know Georgia has a lot of talent of their own, but at running back, I can't give them the nod. At wide receiver, maybe you can call that one even. I think Texas is still more deeper, and Isaiah Bond's better than anybody that Georgia has. He's better than their number 1, basically, and up front, they're better as well. I like the D-line for the Horns a little bit more than the Bulldogs, but at linebacker and in the secondary, I got to give the nod to Kirby Smart's bunch. It's crazy to see Georgia have this many disadvantages. You think this is inaccurate, or you think it's quite fair?
I think wide receiver I'd give it even, but outside of that, I think this is quite accurate. I think Texas has been a better team in the trenches on both sides of the ball so far this season. I think quarterback is even. I do think the running back room, you have to give to Texas based off the lack of production from UGA this year. I think this is a fair tale of the tape. I think it honestly could even make it closer for even in terms of the linebacking core. It might be a hot take, but I think the linebacking core for Texas is getting slept on, is not getting the proper love in terms of how strong of a unit that is as well. These are 2 teams that are balanced, right? These are the top 5 teams in the country. You got the number 1 team, number 5 team for a reason. So these teams are going to be very similar. I think Texas gets a nod a lot of these positions. I think it makes a lot of sense for me. They're the number 1 team in the country, they're the best team in the country so far this season, and they deserve that high praise.
Looking at the final thoughts and the prediction. Keys to the game for Georgia, you got to let Beck cook. He's been doing a great job this year in terms of airing it out and picking up big chunk plays. Defense needs to play better, quite frankly, and they need the big plays on that side of the ball in crucial moments. For Texas' offensive line needs to continue to be stout. Limit big plays downfield because they're going to be tested. And we can sit here and do all the analysis we want, Nick, but I think at the end of the day, this is going to come down to 2 great quarterbacks duking it out in Austin. And this is a tough game to pick because I really think Beck is going to play a phenomenal game. But I think that Texas will make less mistakes. I think they'll be more consistent. I think they'll be more balanced as well. And they haven't had a game like this in forever. I know they hosted Bama in a big game a couple years ago, but it wasn't as big as, the Mac Brown days. Number 1 Texas hosting an in-conference foe with a lot on the line, Nick. I mean, this is a major game they've not had in a decade, it seems, in Austin. They're not going to lose this game, even though I think Georgia's going to give them a heck of a push for their money. It's hard to see the Bulldogs losing 2 games. I think that'll be the story, though, in Austin come the end of Saturday night. 4-point victory for me in favor of the Horns. all the reasons I just listed off, Nick, are exactly why.
I think you're right. When you look at it, there have been a lot of big games in Austin in previous years. Alabama came there in 2021. LSU came there in 2019. Notre Dame came there, I believe, in 2016 or 17. Those were all top 10 teams, but Texas wasn't a top team at those times, right? Texas played those games close, but they weren't a top 5, top 10 team in the country, and they certainly weren't number 1. You have to go back, over a decade to get to the point where this team in Austin was playing at a high level that they are. This is a phenomenal team. This is back to your late 2000s eras where these Texas teams were playing tough opponents in conference in DKR over and over again and playing those key games. They never play Oklahoma at DKR, but they played other tough conference opponents. Georgia comes into town. This is a close game, right? It's tough to pick this one, a top 5 matchup between two teams. You could nitpick things all you want and say, oh, well, Beck did this, or Ewers did that, or the offensive line did this. But at the end of the day, these are two incredibly talented football teams that are incredibly even, slugging it out on the national scale on prime time on Saturday night, and you really can't beat that. And I think, you're inclined to pick the home team in a game like this, and that's why I'm going to go lean with Texas. But I also think Texas is the best team in the country. From what I've seen so far through the season, Texas is the best team in the country. Yes, they haven't played a super incredibly tough schedule, but they just beat the brakes off Oklahoma, who were a top 25 team. They beat Michigan on the road. For me, they're leaps and bounds the best team in the country. I think they have the best quarterback right now in terms of pure production and pure opportunity to produce in Quinn Ewers. I think they have an incredible running back room. I think they have a defense that's not getting as much love as it deserves, and they're playing in front of a ruckus 100,000+ crowd stadium. They're going to bring out all the superstars. They're going to bring out all the big names. I'm sure Matthew McConaughey, the governor, all those people will be there. It's going to be a big crowd. You're going to have that energy. Kevin Durant might even make an appearance. All the big names are going to show up. This is a game that matters. I think Texas is due for a letdown at some point. I just don't think it's this weekend. I think A&M's probably the game I'm circling where Texas will probably have a letdown. Right now, I'm taking the Horns, taking them by a touchdown. I think they'll win this game. I think they might take a nice lead. I think they'll take a 14, 20-point lead, but Georgia will play their way back into it because Georgia's just never going to roll over and die. We saw that in Tuscaloosa. We've seen that in other games that they've lost in the Kirby Smart era. So I think it's going to be close. I don't think Georgia's going to roll over and die. I expect the Horns to jump out to a lead early, and then slowly but surely Georgia will pick apart that lead and make it a close game in the end. But I'm taking the number 1 team in the nation to stay perfect, stay unbeaten, and climb atop of that leaderboard. A lot of top teams have lost. We saw Ohio State go down this weekend. We saw Alabama go down the weekend before that. Georgia to them the week before that. So a lot of top teams continue to fall, but Texas, they're sitting on top of that mountain looking pretty and feeling pretty good right now.
I think the Horns are primed and ready for this game. It just seems like a moment they've been waiting on. It doesn't seem like they're going to fail to capitalize on it. And outside of Beck having a big day, I'm really not sure what edges I can really give to Georgia that would justify picking the Dogs on the road, other than the Bulldogs have been the top dog in college football for a couple of seasons. The reality is this is a tough sport, and it's tough to win on the road, so I think Texas will be getting the job done. This will be a highly entertaining game, Nick. I can't wait for this one to go down, though. The SEC, these games are phenomenal. The conference has been a little bit shaky, but I think, again, Texas is primed for a game like this. They're not going to squander the opportunity away. They're going to play a very good, clean game. This offensive line is going to prove why they are number 1 in the nation.
Certainly feels like Texas is going to live up to expectations. The center of the sporting universe feels like it's located in Austin, Texas this weekend, as the F1 race is also taking place there. Game day will be in town, and this monumental matchup Saturday night. So there's a lot going on in Texas. Austin, Texas is the place to be right now. I think those fans are ready. I think the team is ready. I think they know this is a big moment, and they're going to live up to the expectations and get the job done Saturday night.
Make sure to like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.